Thank you very much. And thank you for the compliments. It's always good to have compliments instead of the contrary, which happens more often. And our subject is German-Israeli relations. And we're not really here to discuss the Middle East. I suppose you've heard about the Middle East the whole day sufficiently. And the Middle East is anyway something that we cannot really analyze. I'm not talking about prediction, but even analysis is not really possible today when you look at what happens. Nobody's in a position to give you an analysis which holds water. The German-Israeli relations. You can't hear? Just a minute. Is that better? Yeah? German-Israeli relations have changed since the start of contacts between Germany and Israel in the early 50s, or even the late 40s, I would say 49 already, there was some contacts, but anyway, in the early 50s. And even though many have predicted that these relations would not really hold, would not remain the way they are, will not be privileged the way they are, in fact, in spite of a small little crisis here and there, all in all, the special relationship always held. And not only did it hold, but I think it became ever more powerful, had ever more deep roots. And the reason is simple. When we started the relationship, which were contacts in secrecy between our two governments for reparations, nobody thought about diplomatic relations or even far-reaching, long-going relations. The State of Israel was badly in need of investments. This was the starter for Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion was not there to look for some understanding with Germany. That was not his first idea, and certainly not the idea of other people around him. Israel was in a particularly difficult situation. Hardly countries recognized Israel. Nobody wanted to invest in Israel. Nobody wanted to invest in Israel privately or governments, because most people worldwide didn't really believe that the State of Israel could survive. Everybody thought, surrounded by the Arab world who haven't recognized it, haven't really accepted the idea of the existence of Israel, Israel will not hold for a long time, so this is not something that attracts investments. The thing was that Israel was in a state of war, in a very bad situation in the state of war, even though it won the first war. It was submerged by immigrants who came without any means, without investments, and had no infrastructure, and had no economic infrastructure. It was a backward country. And what Israel needed in order to survive, simply in order to survive, was investments. And there was no one there to invest. The United States was rather in bad relations with Israel at that time. The Jews in America were not really interested, not yet, because of the situation in the United States. This is not a subject today, but this was the case. The real interest of the Jews in America and Israel, or the massive interest of Jews in America and Israel, came only after the Six-Day War. And what we did get was immigrants. Immigrants, more and more and more, and within 2 years we doubled the population with people who had no means. So in order to survive, Ben-Gurion needed urgently, immediately, investments. And this was really the basis of the reparations agreement. Adenauer needed that in order to get international recognition, in order to be accepted in the international community. He said so himself. Without some understanding with the Jews, he will never get real recognition worldwide. So it was a German interest, the way he saw it. Israel needed the reparations in order to build an economy, in order also to be able to survive. That was a start. But at that particular moment, nobody thought of real deep and long-standing relations between the two countries. It was an immediate interest. And I think most Israelis didn't really want to have relations with Germany. There were demonstrations against Germany. There were even violent demonstrations. People didn't want to have any contact with the Germans. And Germany had other problems. Most of the Germans were not really interested in German past, in the German Nazi past. They had totally different worries, and they wanted to forget the Nazi past if they didn't, if it weren't those who really still believed in it. But most of the people, and the Germans we know today who are interested in Israel, who know about Israel, know about World War II, who know about the Shoah and all that, they hardly existed at that time. They were a very small minority. And the Israelis, as I said, had totally different worries and certainly didn't want to have any contact with the Germans. What really transformed the situation and brought us to a situation we know today, whereby we Israelis consider Germany best friend of Israel after the United States, the very best friend worldwide, the most reliable friend of Israel worldwide. That was a long process. I think we're going to discuss this process this evening. But I would just like to point at one particular development that impressed me very much. How did it come to this particular situation? I'm not talking now about the critics against Israel in Germany today. I suppose you know that most Germans prefer to criticize Israel today instead of supporting it. Most Israelis support Germany and like Germany. The situation is totally reversed with comparison to those years. But this is a different situation, and this has to do with the political evolution in our area. What I would like to point out, that this is one thing that impressed me very much when I started to learn about Germany and get acquainted with Germany, which was not always my case, was that the deep relations, the personal relations, the ties between Germany and Israel were developed without having been planned. Nobody wanted to have them. It was an evolution that nobody thought about. And this is the only point I want to make, and then I'll leave the discussion to our problems of today. We wanted from Germany reparations. That was a point. As I said, Ben-Gurion needed urgently, matter of life and death, to build an economy in this country. We had no economy, and nobody wanted to invest. So he said, this is the responsibility of the Germans. After what they did, they have to repair. Now, you cannot repair the Holocaust. That goes without saying. But at least you can help Israel to get the means to receive the refugees, those who still remained in Europe after the Holocaust. And this is not a reparation. We didn't call it reparations. We call it Shilumim. And the Germans call it Wiedergutmachung, totally different point of view. But we needed that simply in order to build a country, simply in order to receive the immigrants, the refugees, and first and foremost, in order to survive. And the Germans needed this, as Adenauer said, in order to create a new image of Germany in order to be able to be accepted into international society. But what was reparations in reality? Many people thought, or some people maybe think about that even today, that the Germans gave us money. We said, you have to give us reparations, give us so and so many millions, and we'll check in, we'll put the money in the bank, we'll use it, and that's reparations. But this wasn't it. For two reasons it wasn't that way. First of all, the Germans didn't have so much money at the time. Germany was still trying to rebuild itself after the total destruction of World War II. And Ben-Gurion was not really interested in money. This is not what he really wanted to, and this is something that most Germans don't know. Ben-Gurion wanted investments in order to build an economy, which he needed urgently as a matter of life and death. And the Germans had no money, but wanted to build an industry, a new industry. And it was good for the industry to export goods, even if those goods were paid by the German government itself and not by the importer. And this was the essence of reparations. We got from Germany machines, spare parts, locomotives, ships. You know, the first ships that were built in Germany after the war, not repaired but built anew were ships for Israel. The first ships that were ever built in Germany after the war, after the total destruction in Germany. This was the basic idea. And this is exactly what Adenauer wanted, and this is what Ben-Gurion wanted. But then a question arose. If you don't send money to Israel, but you send machines and spare parts, how will the Israelis know, how will the Israelis learn how to deal with these machines who are totally unknown for them? You have to send with the machines experts who can install the machines and teach the Israelis how to use them. You have to receive Israelis in Germany, the German factories, to learn about the German industry and the German machines. But if this was the case, we had a problem, because at the time, Israelis, in their vast majority, were against any contact whatsoever with any Germans. And the Germans were afraid to go to Israel. They thought, who knows what will happen to them if they go to the Jewish country after the Holocaust. This was a dilemma for both governments at the beginning. And then, you know, when you're in a very difficult situation, you can always find some people who have the guts, let's say, and say, okay, I'll sacrifice myself for the good of the country, for the good of the nation. I'll take the risk. And so we had people who went to Germany, but promised themselves, and their families, of course, that they will learn about the Germans' machine, but they will never, never, ever speak with Germans. There will be no human contact with Germans. And the Germans who came here were shivering in their shoes. I met in Bonn many, many years later a very old man who was retired, and he told me how he came to Israel in the 50s. He said, my family thought I was committing suicide. I was totally crazy for going there to the Jews. They would, of course, murder me. But I had no choice because I had no work, and I needed it urgently. So it was really a matter of need. Nobody imagined what was going to happen. And I'll just say it very shortly because I don't want to give you a long description now. What happened was a development that nobody has expected and nobody wanted of human relations, human contacts. People who work together, Israelis in Germany, Germans in Israel, but particularly Israelis in Germany, worked with the other side. And when you work with other people, sooner or later you start talking to them, even though you promised yourself you won't, but you do, because this is human nature. You sit and have coffee with them. I'm at the end. Sit and have coffee with them, and you start being curious. Who are you? Where do you come from? What did you do during the war? What did your parents do during the war? And slowly but slowly, human relations developed that nobody had expected and nobody wanted. And this was the starter for the development of relations after the end of reparations. Reparations for Israel, not for Jews, but for Israel, took only 12 years long, from 1952 to 1964, and that was the end of it. But then we got used to German goods, to the German industry, to such an extent that we continued to import those goods from Germany, even though we had to pay for them, normally. And this developed further on, the human relations, and I think the human relations was really the starter of relations between Jews and Germans that, as I repeat, nobody wanted. But then we had a long, long way to go, and I suppose this is what we're going to discuss now. Thank you.